What family tradition ruined your family? My cousin Ava died on a Monday. She was 17. Bright, popular, the kind of girl who wore eyeliner like armor and made it look effortless. She didn't die dramatically. No accident, no mystery. Just didn't wake up. They said it was her heart, but I saw the bruises on her wrists at the funeral. I saw the band of red around her neck when the makeup cracked under the heat lamps. I asked my aunt about it, and she pulled me into a linen closet, gripped my face with both hands, and said, "Don't ask, don't look. And whatever happens next, obey." That's when I knew it was starting again. The tradition, the one no one talked about outside the family, the one passed down like a curse, stitched into our blood. Every generation in our family has a balance keeper, someone chosen to absorb the suffering when a relative dies tragically. It's not superstition, it's not folklore, it's punishment disguised as legacy. We don't mourn, we replace. That week, the elders said Ava's death was unbalanced. Too young, too sudden, not fair to the line. So someone had to carry her weight, to suffer in her place, to keep the spirits calm. They chose me. I wasn't surprised, I was always the quiet one, the sensitive one, the one who flinched when people raised their voices and apologized, even when I hadn't done anything wrong. Perfect vessel material. The night after the funeral, they took me to the old family house, the one with the rotting porch and dead clocks on the wall. They didn't say what we were doing, they never do. They just handed me a white linen gown and told me to change. It smelled like salt and vinegar and something metallic. I asked where we were going. Aunt Irene said, "To restore what's broken." Uncle Dan lit candles and whispered words in a language I didn't recognize. They put oil on my forehead. They wrapped my wrist with red thread. Then they locked me in the basement for 3 days. There was no light, no water, just a thin blanket and a bowl of dry rice. I wasn't allowed to speak, not even to scream. They called it silence fasting, the first stage of the tradition. "You can't absorb her pain if you're still filled with your own," my aunt explained through the door. On the second day, I started hallucinating. I saw Ava, her face floating in the dark, lips cracked, eyes weeping blood. She whispered, "It was supposed to be you." On the third day, I banged on the door until my hands went raw. No one came. I think they wanted me to break. I think they needed me to. When they let me out, the sun felt like acid. They wrapped me in wool and poured milk over my feet. I don't know why. They called it grounding. My legs shook so badly I couldn't walk. They fed me boiled roots and made me sleep on the floor for a week. Every night, they made me write letters to Ava. Not to say goodbye, to say I was sorry for surviving. At school, I stopped speaking. I floated through the halls like a ghost, head down, eyes dull. My friends thought I was grieving. They hugged me, asked me to come to lunch. I smiled and nodded, then went home and stared at the wall until it was time for the next cleansing. They shaved my head on the 12th day, said hair held memory, said I needed to be lighter. I cried the whole time. Aunt Irene slapped me and said, "You dishonor her with your tears." The worst part was my mother. She didn't stop them. She didn't look away either. She watched, eyes dry, mouth tight, fingers folded neatly in her lap, like this was normal, like this was holy, like I should be grateful. That's when I started to realize something. This wasn't about Ava. This wasn't even about grief. This was about control, about fear, about generations of women forced into submission and told it was divine. This wasn't tradition. It was torture with candles. I wasn't the first. I wouldn't be the last. But I could be the one who remembered, the one who told. That didn't let me go to Ava's burial, said I'd done too much crying, said the ground wouldn't take her if I polluted it with weakness. Instead, they made me kneel on the back porch, hands bound with thorn vine, and listen to the funeral through a Staticy baby monitor. Her name echoed through that tiny speaker like it didn't belong to a real person. And then I heard the shovels. I never heard a coffin close. After the service, they brought me a small bowl of black tea and something wrapped in wax paper. "Eat," Aunt Irene said, like she was offering a blessing. I unwrapped it. A cube of meat, cold, gray, no smell. "What is it?" I asked. She smiled without using her eyes. "Part of the balance." I didn't eat it. I pretended to. Spit it out behind the shed when no one was looking. My stomach turned for hours after. That night, I heard them chanting in the cellar. When I crept down to peek through the crack, I saw the soil had been moved, fresh, uncovered. Like they hadn't buried Ava at all, like they were feeding something. Over the next few weeks, the rituals escalated. They no longer used euphemisms. They said things like, pain anchors you to the ancestors. You must bleed to remind the soil that you're alive. Her death is hungry. You are the meal. They cut my palms with ceremonial blades and pressed my hands into family photo albums. The blood soaked through the pages, blotting out faces. Let her carry your memory, Aunt Irene whispered. Let her sleep in your skin. They made me walk barefoot in the rain and chant Ava's name 108 times while holding a bowl of ashes above my head. Every time I faltered, they poured more ash in. I couldn't breathe by the time it ended. I wasn't supposed to. My mother still said nothing. She watched everything. Her silence wasn't passive. It was ritual too. She ironed the linens for each ceremony. She measured the ash. She stitched the gown I was required to wear every Sunday, threaded with tiny red beads, to ward off Ava's resentment. I asked her once, just once, "Do you believe this?" She looked at me with eyes so empty I thought maybe something had already crawled inside and taken her over. "This is what kept us alive when the world wanted us gone," she said. "You should be proud." I wasn't. I was scared. I tried to tell someone, my history teacher, a kind woman who wore knitted sweaters and smelled like lemon. I waited until everyone left class and said, "Can I tell you something about my family?" She smiled, nodded and said, "Of course." I told her pieces, just enough, about the fasting, the locked room, the knives. She stopped smiling halfway through. When I finished, she put her hand on mine and said, "Sometimes grief makes people behave strangely, but I'm sure your family loves you." I nodded, then went home and threw up everything I'd eaten that day. The next morning, the teacher was gone. They said she took emergency leave. I never saw her again. That weekend, they made me sleep in the graveyard. Not a public one, our family's private plot, hidden behind a rusted gate deep in the trees. I lay on top of Ava's marker, shivering under a thin sheet, while the others circled me with candles. One by one, they recited apologies, not to me, to her, for letting me live. I stopped dreaming after that. Sleep became a place I visited, not something I surrendered to. I started hearing whispers in the walls. I started seeing shadows that didn't belong to anyone. Sometimes I'd wake up and there would be red thread tied around my wrists, tighter than I remembered. Aunt Irene called it marking the passage. She said, "If the line breaks, Ava comes back." I asked her once, "What happens if she does?" She just smiled. "Then the debt is repaid." I think that's when I understood. This wasn't grief. This wasn't tradition. This was worship. Not of Ava, of pain, of death, of control. They don't bury the dead in my family. They plant them. And they expect the living to rot in their place. The family never talked about Aunt Elise. They said she was fragile, that she moved away, that she didn't believe in the way of the blood. They said it like that, the way of the blood, like it was scripture. But I remember her. Not her face exactly, just impressions. A gold ring with a chipped ruby, a warm scent like cloves, a humming voice behind closed doors, and I remember how every time I asked about her, my mother changed the subject. After the graveyard ritual, something shifted inside me. Not defiance, not yet, just the quiet birth of doubt. A flicker. I started paying closer attention to the house, listening more, moving in silence, and that's how I found it. There was a loose floorboard under the guest bedroom dresser, the room no one slept in, the one they used for energy storage. Another one of Aunt Irene's cryptic terms. I pried it open late one night after everyone had gone to bed. Inside, a rusted tin box, wrapped in linen and twine. I didn't breathe as I opened it. Inside were 37 handwritten letters, each signed Elise. They weren't dated, but the paper was yellowed, warped. Some had blood spots on the edges. One had a burn mark, like someone had tried to destroy it. I took the first one to my room, tucked it inside my pillowcase, and waited until the sun rose to read it. What I found changed everything. I thought it was love at first. The way they wrapped me in white and told me I was chosen. The way they kissed my forehead and said I had her spirit. But love doesn't make you bleed for someone you've never met. Love doesn't lock you in a cellar and call it grace. I tried to run in 86. They caught me by the river, told me the spirits would drown me if I ever left again. They were wrong. It wasn't the spirits I was scared of. It was them. I started pretending I couldn't hear the voices. It's easier that way. If they think you're empty, they stop filling you with pain. She wasn't fragile. She was resisting, and they broke her for Iteth. I read 5 letters that night. They were desperate, poetic, unraveling. Some had spelling mistakes. Some seemed written while in a rush or in fear. One ended with just 2 words, "Don't forget." I confronted my mother. I waited until we were alone in the kitchen, and I said, "Where is Elise?" She didn't look surprised, just tired. "She's gone." That's not an answer. She stopped believing. And when you stop believing, the spirits stop protecting you. I pressed further. "Did she die?" A pause. Then, "She was taken." Taken where? She wouldn't say. She walked out of the room and locked her door behind her. I could hear her crying, or maybe laughing. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. I kept reading the letters, every night, 1 or 2 at a time. Some were addressed to no one. Some were addressed to me. She called me Little Shadow, said she had seen me in a dream, said I'd be the one to dig through dirt and find the truth. She said, "If you're reading this, they chose you." I'm sorry, but also, good, because you're the one they didn't prepare for. I started asking questions out loud. Too loud. I asked Aunt Irene why Elise's room was always locked. She slapped me so hard I saw stars. "You speak her name again and you'll sleep outside, like the others." The others? She didn't answer, but I remembered something Alice had written. I wasn't the only one. I just screamed the loudest. A few days later, I found a second hiding spot. Behind a painting in the hallway, an ugly still life with oranges and flies. Behind it, a small envelope. Inside, a photo. A black and white image of Elise standing in front of the chapel. Her hair was long, her eyes mine. On the back, she tried to burn it down. That same night, they moved me into the chapel, said it was part of the final cleansing. They called it the inheritance stage. They stripped the mattress, took away my books, left only the gown, a jug of salt water, and a candle I wasn't allowed to light. I was supposed to pray, but I didn't. I thought of Elise, of her ring, her voice, her fire, and for the first time since Ava died, I felt something close to rage. They came in the next morning, 3 of them, silent. They painted something on my forehead with ash, wrapped my legs in linen. Aunt Irene leaned in close and whispered, "She's watching you. Don't disappoint her." I stared at her and said, "She's not the one watching me." She blinked, then stood, then left. But her hands trembled. Elise's letters were buried in the walls of this house like bones, and I had read enough to know they buried the wrong woman. The chapel wasn't sacred. It was a cage built out of pretend holiness. There were no windows, just wooden slats sealed with nails and prayers I wasn't allowed to read. A single candle in the center, a dirt floor, a locked door with a latch on the outside. They said it was temporary confinement, said it was part of the closing ceremony, said I was on the edge of transformation. What they didn't say was how long they'd leave me there, or what they were hoping would happen first, surrender or collapse. The first day, I tried to be calm. I counted the knots in the wood. I breathed in 4 seconds, held for 7, out for 8. I drank the salt water sparingly. I paced the floor like a trapped animal. They didn't come. Not that day, not the next, not the one after that. By the 3rd night, I started talking to Elise. Aloud. I wasn't sure if I was praying or hallucinating, but it helped. Her name tasted like rebellion. I recited her words like scripture. If they think you're empty, they stop filling you with pain. Let your stillness be the weapon they fear most. I waited. I did not scream. That, I think, was the first time I scared them. On the 4th day, they opened the door. Aunt Irene stepped in, face shadowed by candlelight. "You've had time to listen," she said softly. "Time to feel her." I stared at her. She handed me a slip of paper, 1 sentence, written in shaky, familiar script. "To end the wait, you must bleed where she was born." I looked up. Did Elise write this? Aunt Irene didn't answer. She just said, "We believe you are ready now." Then closed the door again. I hid the paper under my sleeve. Later, I memorized it. The words scratched at me all night. Bleed where she was born. Did they mean Ava? Elise? Me? Did it matter? On the 5th day, I found something carved into the floor beneath the candle, barely visible unless the light hit it. Right, a circle, with 4 names scratched around the edges: Avenue Elise, Marianne, Leah. I knew 2. I asked about Marianne once when I was younger. She died before you were born, they said, too soft to carry the weight. And Leah? Never heard of her. I started wondering how many girls had been too soft. How many just vanished into the silence. That night I stopped whispering Elise's name. I said my own, out loud, firmly. My name is Anna. I am not a vessel. I am not your apology. The candle flickered. Something in the walls creaked. I didn't blink. On the 6th day, they brought me the robe. It was longer than before, laced with crimson at the collar, the final ritual robe. You'll wear it when the moon is full, my mother said. Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. What happens when it's full? I asked. Balance, she replied. Just that. Nothing else. Balance. Like that meant anything anymore. I didn't sleep that night, because I remembered something Elise wrote. The robe is not a blessing, it's a shroud. On the 7th day, I searched the chapel again. My hands raw from scraping walls, my knees sore from crawling through the dirt. And that's when I found it. A small wooden trapdoor under a warped plank, almost invisible, covered in dust and soot. I pulled it open, inside a staircase, stone, crumbling, descending into something I could barely see. I didn't hesitate. I went down. The air was colder below. I moved slowly, hand on the wall, 1 foot at a time. At the bottom, a corridor, lined with jars, hundreds of them, each labeled with dates, initials, and blood. Literal blood. Some were dried, some fresh, some labeled with names I recognized. Avenue Ellis. ML1 was labeled AW with today's date. Me. I turned and ran back up. I sealed the door again, covered it with dirt, sat in the center of the chapel, shaking. They weren't just performing rituals, they were collecting us, documenting our suffering like trophies, recording how long we lasted, who broke first, who balanced enough to stay alive. I knew then the moon wasn't the end, it was the harvest. And I was next. I made a decision. If I couldn't run, I would hide myself another way. I stopped eating. I smeared ash on my face, let my body waste itself, weaken, dim. When they came to dress me in the robe the next night, I collapsed in their arms, too weak to carry, too hollow to wear. They panicked, whispered about delays, spiritual interference. Maybe she's not the right one after all, they argued, loudly, scared. I smiled inside, because Elise was right. If they think you're empty, they stop filling you with pain. I lay there on the chapel floor, eyes closed, pulse low, lips cracked. And in that moment, I wasn't a girl. I wasn't a name in a blood jar. I was a ghost. And ghosts, they don't obey. I didn't run the way Elise tried to, didn't bolt for the trees or scream at locked doors. I let them think I was dying. It turns out, if you starve the spirit, they lose interest in the body. By the 9th day, they moved me from the chapel to the back room of the main house. To regain strength, they said, but they didn't speak to me the same way anymore. No more prayers, no more chants, just worry, whispers. They thought they'd broken me. They hadn't. They just gave me space to breathe, and I used every second of it. I waited until the full moon passed, until they were too tired, too frustrated, too busy arguing over who would take my place. Then I slipped into the chapel one last time, lifted the trapdoor, took 3 jars, one with Ava's blood, one with Elisa's, and one with mine. I wrapped them in the same robe they wanted me to die in, and I burned it. The fire was quiet. It didn't scream or rage. It hissed, software certain. The ash turned silver under the moonlight. I stood barefoot in the flames and whispered, "You don't own me anymore." I left that night, took nothing but the letters, the photo, and the journal I found tucked under the chapel altar. Elise's final words. She had written, "If you ever make it out, remember this. They aren't strong. They're afraid. Of you, of truth, of silence breaking." The world outside was louder than I remembered. Birdsong felt violent. Wind hurt my ears. I didn't speak to anyone for 2 days.